I would like to invite you to join us for our ICF virtual conference called The Voyage Continues, July 23 through 25 later this summer, beginning at 6 p.m. London time each day. Friday will be devoted to our commemoration of the voyage of the Mayflower 400 years ago. Saturday will be devoted to other Mayflower stories. How did Congregationalism come to the various parts of the world outside of Britain and the United States? Sunday will be devoted to COVID stories from our churches around the world and a collective worship service reaching all the way around the globe. I hope you will be able to join us. To register for this free conference, please go to www.theicf.org.
We're here with Victoria Turner, who's going to be our moderator during day one of our conference with the main speakers, and we've just asked her here to talk a bit about her research. So, hi Vicky, hi, you're right.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, nice to have you. It's a big ask, but could you give us a rundown of your current PhD research at the University of Edinburgh?
So yeah, in New College, I'm in the field of world Christianity, and I'm looking at how changes in mission theology, predominantly stemming from the ecumenical movement, have changed mission practice. And I'm looking at the case study of how the London Missionary Society changed to the Council for World Mission, in a way to try and overcome colonialism in the partnership, as a case study for how that theory turned into practice.
That's great, and you look at the Iona community as well, don't you? Which is kind of not too close to us, but is Scotland based as well on the Isle of Iona.
So there's a lot in Glasgow though. So
yeah. If you could give a bit of background as well to that would be really interesting.
Sure. So I'm kind of using these two case studies as a contrast of each other, whereas the Council for Mission is looking to overcome colonialism and look to make global partnerships, whereas the Iona community in its origins in 1938 was predominantly to overcome classism, and it got workers and craftsmen together with ministers in training to really make the Church of Scotland relevant again. But it kind of just expanded and expanded and expanded, and now it's just really big, almost global, not in the same way as the Council for Mission is global, but just this organisation of individuals working for social justice.
Because they do a lot of worship resources, don't they, as well, that people who are attending the conference might be familiar with, which they've become quite famous for.
Worship resources, and also this idea of Celtic theology and connection with nature. They've been pioneers, I guess you could say, in as well.
Yeah.
Not all of it's perfect, but
I think it'd be fair to say that they're kind of the leading base of that approach, I think. But I think your expertise in colonial theology as well is going to be really interesting as an addition to this conference, because obviously the conference was supposed to happen last year as an anniversary, the 400th anniversary of the sailing of the Mayflower. And the Pilgrim story is intertwined with issues of colonialism inextricably, and that can't really be separated. So it's lovely to have you as the moderator of the panel to push the speakers to think more in those terms. So I'm wondering if you could just give a background to kind of colonial theology, some of the main approaches maybe, or just how it's come as an approach, and what are the current discussions, I guess, that are being had in that field?
It's kind of one of those hard things to set, because there are so many approaches, and to kind of try and make it basic makes it sound quite trivial, but I guess in mainstream Christianity now we really have the two splits between evangelical and ecumenical, whereas the more evangelical kind of side sees world Christianity as a brilliant reality, and colonialism, we can have post-colonial theory and decolonial theory in there, but ultimately Christianity has to be elevated. Christianity as an institution, usually they try and downplay the issues, whereas ecumenical theology, I think, is like recently, especially coming from the Council for Admission circles, are really trying to advance the discussion to talk about how like all of the wrongs that we did and reparations and like radical things like that. So I think world Christianity as a field, there is a tendency to talk about like conversion coming from the Holy Spirit, which I think there's like a really good value in there. But at the same time, it can overlook some of the like nitty gritty issues, like and the realities of living in a system and having your religion stripped away from you and your culture being looked down upon, and the issues of racism that obviously are still endemic now. And I think the Council for Admission have been doing a really good series called The Legacies of Slavery, where they've looked at how their racist nature in the missionary society, especially through like children's journals actually, contributed through the ages of a superiority of whiteness. And that superiority is really like the nationalistic idea that we have now, and it connects to things like the hostile environment. It connects to the resistance to Black Lives Matter. And they've had a few people who are like from the receiving nations of mission look back on the archives and like of what their ancestors have said, and just like read it in a way to feel, not necessarily to be historically accurate, which people have issues with, again, because obviously the London Missionary Society had people like David Livingstone and like a wonderful history of anti-slavery, but at the same time in many ways they were complicit in the everyday racism. So yeah, like trying to think it theologically by feeling rather than being necessarily like historically on the point. And these two things, I think, although they can contrast each other, I think are really complementary, that we can actually get to a point of like proper decolonization and understanding our history and what it means for us today.
I guess so. So that feeling of other people's perspectives would be kind of an initial step to take towards having proper discussions, and that's kind of the most important beginning thing for people to think about.
Precisely. So
Yeah.
I think this shift from the London Missionary Society to the Council for Admission, actually the big step happened in the global conference they had with, I think it was like 24 church leaders from the Western world and 24 church leaders from the majority world. And in 1971, they met together in Singapore. And it was the majority church leaders who were saying, like, this is how we feel. We want to be equal partners and we're willing to pay as much as we can in this partnership. That changed the way that the society was run, and that completely changed it. That in 1977, one historian, Brian Stanley, said it's completely like, you can't understand it as a missionary society because it doesn't look like one anymore. And I think when you have this, you can say that like that is a process then of decolonization. If it doesn't look like what it looked like before, good change has happened. And it's from listening to the majority of the voices and not just deciding what would be best. But there are some problems with that process there. Like after the meeting, it went back to London and like the Western nations decided how it would be restructured. So still today, we still have a bit of like, we're not quite there.
It's kind of an ongoing process. But hopefully this conference, although it's more specific just in dealing with the pilgrims and the legacies that have come out of that story, can be part of that process and discussion towards a more a fairer conversation that involves all groups who've been impacted, I guess. So would it be fair to say that you would want the speakers to perhaps frame their thinking in a more ecumenical way opposed to an evangelical way, perhaps? Although that might be controversial to say.
I think we've got a good legacy, an interesting legacy, and a rich legacy, being nonconformists too, right? And congregationalists and listening to every voice in the debate. And I think there's a tension, and it's an easy thing to fall into of just looking at the main characters. But actually, I think it's in the relationships with those characters where we really understand the world. So yeah, I think just understanding connections are just as important as understanding like the big impacts that I've remembered. Yeah,
no, it's an interesting way of framing it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to you being part of our conference and moderating our session. And I think you'll bring a really important voice voice to our proceedings as well. So thank you for spending the time and being interviewed about your research.
Thanks. I'm really looking forward to the papers.